with Andy Janning. Andy, thank you for joining me on the Knowledge Stack podcast. Why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself and tell my dozens and dozens, maybe almost 100 listeners about what you do.
So I have been blessed to work for over 3 decades in the financial services industry, the best 27 and counting now inside the credit union world. I was the VP of Talent Development for Forum Credit Union in Indianapolis from 1998 to 2012. And then I started my own speaking and consulting company at that time to talk about leadership development, communications, just all of the good things that I had been doing from a talent development. And then in 2019, everything kind of shifted for me. That's when my wife was diagnosed with cancer, and my priorities switched, her priorities switched. 9 months after she was diagnosed, that's when the world went into lockdown with COVID. But that's when I was also given an opportunity by the National Credit Union Foundation to help credit unions understand the financial crisis of cancer in this country. So the National Foundation commissioned me to create a 7-part documentary about that subject, which literally changed the entire course of my career. So after releasing that, I've spent most of my time working on how do we get the financial services industry, specifically credit unions, to better see and serve our members with cancer. And through that process, I've really grown up a lot when it comes to storytelling. Like, it started as, how can we tell a better story about what the work that we're doing for people with cancer? But then it's kind of expanded, like, hey, I've been inside this industry for some of the best years of my life, and I'm seeing that there are some systematic issues when it comes to storytelling inside of our industry. We've got rich stories, we have amazing narratives that are out there, but they're not getting the kind of visibility that we need. They're not getting the kind of traction that we need. Another one of my focuses now is, how can we help credit unions tell great stories, not just about themselves, but about the members that they serve and the communities that they serve. So I've lots of irons in the fire, but they all kind of rotate around this same shared idea of telling great stories, and helping people do the same, and helping our communities know what we do, and hopefully attracting more people to the cause.
Yeah, we got connected on LinkedIn not too long after GAC. You had posted a comment about the differentiation between credit unions, and you made the case that if your credit union is just like another credit union, and your quote unquote story is easily switched if you just change the name of the credit union in the story. Mm-hmm. Are you differentiating? Are you telling your story, or your member's story, or your credit union story? I love that. I love that, the sentiment. I love the way that you framed it. And we chatted a little bit about that once we connected on LinkedIn. Why do you think we sort of fall into that trap, speaking as a credit union professional for about 27 years? So we've both sort of been in the credit union industry for about the same amount of time. Why do we fall into that trap?
I think it's primarily structural. It's not a fault of writing talent. It's not a fault of, we're just out there to get the almighty dollar. It's so easy when we see someone do something that we don't understand. It's so easy for us to assume that they're doing it because that's just who they are. Like when somebody cuts you off on the highway, they cut you off because they're a jerk, idiot, moron, bad person. But if you cut somebody off, you're a good person. You just really needed to make your exit. And in psychology, it's called the fundamental attribution error. It's the number one reason why human relationships break, because we tell bad stories about why other people do what they do. Mm-hmm. I think the reason because our stories break, because we're very good at talking about what the organization does, but we still haven't quite made the leap of, how does this impact our members? How is this impacting a specific member? The two most important words you can ever say in a speaking engagement, in a story, are the words, for example. How can we put this down on the ground? How can we put a real face to it? And so that's, I think, element one. How can we make this personal? And with that personal connection, there comes a little bit of risk there. You don't know, what you're going to get from them necessarily. So you have to build trust. It has to build a connection there. You have to kind of earn that place inside of their world to be able to tell that story in a way that's meaningful for not just the member, but then also for the credit union too. So I think a lot of our challenges come down to structure. I think again, I think we as an industry are really, really good again reporting what we do. We're writing about, here's what we did, but we haven't quite mastered how to tell a story yet. And that's a structural issue that I think can be solved, but I do think we have a lot of work to do.
So I want to talk more about the specificity, but I'm curious, do you think some of the challenges are structural? Some of us double down on the fact that we're a cooperative. We're different than banks. We're different than those other fintechs and financial institutions. Do we use our cooperative status as a sort of a warm blanket and as a crutch to just through the lens of being a cooperative and miss the opportunity to focus on those specific wins or those specific opportunities?
Absolutely, we do. And I don't think that's out of malice. I don't think that's out of convenience or any sort of bad intention. I think it's just habit. I think we've been able to kind of get by on saying, hey, we're the good guys. We wear the white hat.
Yep.
And in an increasingly fragmented financial services world, an increasingly differentiated world, an increasingly digital world, I think that just by being able to say we have the white hat on, that doesn't really resonate. People want to know, how are you going to change my life? How are you going to transform my finances? How have you done this for someone else that I can connect with? How can you take me on a journey? And I think that speaks to the larger issue of what makes stories compelling. And we can talk about that here at length, but I want to be really, really clear about the fact that being cooperative isn't a bad thing.
Sure.
Being not for profit isn't a bad thing.
Absolutely.
I do think, however, that to the waiting and watching world, the people outside of the credit union beltway, if you will, people don't know about that.
Absolutely.
I think they'll care about it once they find out how it actually manifests and moves in real people's lives and what the credit union had to do to make that happen, the institutional friction that they had to overcome. I think people will respond to that.
Yep.
We haven't gotten there yet, and we really haven't had a consistent way of getting that content out there. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to build to help credit unions do that.
To take your white hat analogy, if we're all standing in a room and we're all wearing white hats, how do you differentiate one white hat from the other white hat?
Right.
So that's where we get into that specificity. I kind of want to double click on one of the things that you said about sharing examples where a credit union has helped others or helped someone like me. I think that's another area where we're missing an opportunity, because all of the research that I've seen says Gen Z, millennials, all very much embrace that meaning and very much embrace the idea of even partnering with customers and vendors and choosing to do business with those that are serving a greater purpose. Is there anything that could be more credit union and more cooperative in nature? And I feel like we a lot of times miss that opportunity. You start looking at our demographics, and credit union members are starting to age out. They're in their late 50s. Board members are in their mid to late 70s. The general population, the average American, is about 33. So we're missing the boat there. We need to do a better job with that. So how do we tell those stories better? I mean, I think every credit union likes to double down on, we have great reviews on, whether it's Amazon or in the Google App Store or if it's in Apple. We all love to say that we've got a 4.5 rating in the app market, and we've got a ton of 5-star reviews, and everybody loves us. But is that enough? Is that us telling our story, or is that just another symptom of our easiness at just being part of this cooperative movement?
Yeah, I think it has become kind of a crutch. I think one of the impediments that come to building great stories, I think one of the enemies of that is time. I've spoken to so many credit union marketing professionals when I was building the framework that I use to help credit unions tell great stories. And one of the common threads running through that is that we just don't have the time. It's just, everything is so fast. We have to keep things out there. We have to kind of keep feeding the machine, if you will. And we don't really have an opportunity to really tell stories that pull people forward, that pull people along. The central question of any story that we tell, that we want the audience to be asking, is what happens next? What happens next? Take me on this journey with me. Help me, help surprise me. That's what separates good stories from great stories. Good stories have transformation, but great stories have surprise. That's what separates a great story from a good story, risk and surprise. And those are two things that credit unions, I think, make them want to hide under the bed. They don't like risk and surprise. And so being able to find stories that can, that have both of those elements, that takes some work, that takes some friction. And this isn't saying that every single thing on a credit union's website or social media has to be filled with risk and surprise. It's not it. You still need, the announcements like, hey, here's the thing that we did to these people. Look at the big check that we handed out. In the framework that I developed, it's called operational reporting. That basically just says the credit union is not going to be struck into existential crisis every time they open a checking account. They know what they're doing. And that's great. But every once in a while, you have to show the human cost of the things that you do to the institution and to the member themselves. You have to take people on a journey. And I think that is something that we need to, with just a little bit of a tweak, with just a little bit more oomph in a certain directions, those are the narratives that will make us stand out, that no other institution in any credit union town or state or community will have. And so it's going to take a little while. And there's some credit unions, I think, that are already doing that. But it's, great stories aren't safe. And I'll probably say that a few times.
Where do you get stories? I mean, how do you acquire these stories? Do you make them up?
Yes. I just put the prompt into Claude and
100%.
Then I create some AI photography, and I'm golden.
Your story sounds amazingly like, a Christmas Carol. That's interesting. How did that happen?
Where it comes from is just curiosity and being able to find out, where was the friction? Where did we fall short with a member? Where did we kind of maybe make the wrong decision? How did we get a member back? I'll give you an example. So, for example, I created the side effects documentary for the National Credit Union Foundation. And one of the people that I featured was a woman in Idaho named Elizabeth. She was 41 at the time. And she went to the hospital a few years ago with like a stomach ache. She just thought it was like the stomach flu. And they said, no, you have a softball-sized malignant tumor in your colon. It is stage 4 colon cancer. It has metastasized. It is going to kill you. And so she was given a death sentence at the age of 41. She starts calling like all of her creditors, all of her financial institutions, and saying, hey, I've basically been given this terrible news. Can you help me? Most of them said yes. And then she called her credit union, Idaho Central Credit Union, and she said, hey, I've got a car loan. I've got 2 credit cards with you guys. And can you guys help me? What do you think that credit union said? What do you think that credit union did, Jason?
I mean, I'd like to think they figured out a way to just say, don't pay your bill. Just cancel the debt.
They did nothing.
Nothing at all.
Initially, their initial reaction to Elizabeth says, I'm sorry, we don't have any programs that can help you.
Wow.
And I can tell you this on the record because they went on the record with this too. During the course of my reporting, that's when they found out that, hey, they kind of dropped the ball. And in the documentary, they go on record. They go on a Zoom interview just like this one. And they say, yeah, we screwed up. We did not do right by this member, but we learned from it. A few months later, they very quietly sent a message to Elizabeth and said, we're going to pay off your car loan. We're going to pay off your credit cards. Please enjoy this time. And that one bit of financial grace helped her hang on long enough to see the birth of her first grandchild.
Oh, wow.
Where your stories are in those places where members are most at risk, or times that we can create the most surprise for our members. They take work to find, and they take a bit of institutional humility. And even to this day, I still honor Idaho Central, one of the largest credit unions in the world, for going on record and saying, this is what we did and this is what we learned. I think that kind of organizational humility, that separates them from everybody else. That is a human moment that people want. And that's what people want in organizational storytelling now. They want the human stuff. They want the real. And they want to be able to connect with the people that are there. And so that's, I think, where are those stories? There are more places than you think, but they're going to take a little bit of work and a little bit of trust and a little bit more phone calls to find them. But once you've got them, they are transformational.
So how do you use that story? Well, that's a powerful story. Where do you draw the line between taking advantage of an opportunity that maybe they didn't handle right the first time, but they certainly made up for it at the end? But where do you draw the line between taking advantage of another human's misfortune? It's got to be some sort of a fine line. You wouldn't put that on the homepage of the credit union, I wouldn't imagine. But where do you use that information? And I don't even like to use the word use because it just has that connotation to it. But how do you tell that story in a way that is not, performative and is not taking advantage of just a horrible situation?
And realizing that particular story, it is a bit of an outlier. It comes down to, I think, first of all, again, that trust that you've built with the member, the rapport that you've built with them, being very upfront and saying, we want to honor the journey that you've been on. We want to honor what you're doing, because that's the thing about story, is that they get so often forgotten because to the people telling them, it just seems like it's routine. And for most folks, it's like, I can't even fathom what made you even do that. And so stories aren't necessarily always ours. They are in many ways what we leave behind. That's some of our most enduring legacies. It's also having a really, I think, an open conversation inside the institution. Like, what kind of narratives are we comfortable with telling? And understanding, what do we want to put out there? What do we not want to put out there? What kind of risk and surprise do we want to feature? How do we do that in a good way, in a responsible way that doesn't just show that, like you said, that we're being performative?
Right.
And this becomes, I think this speaks, I think, to the larger mission of what we need to be doing, is that we need to keep asking ourselves, who really are we serving here? Do we love our members, or do we just love their stuff? And in the service of this, if we are upfront with our members and saying, what comes natural to you is miraculous to somebody else, we want to be able to honor that. And that's one of the reasons why we are a cooperative. And so I think leading with that's what I've seen, not just in the Side Effects documentary, but in the later documentary work that I've been doing, the unbelievable generosity of folks that they want to share. That's been incredibly powerful. And if some folks say, I don't really want you to put that out there, then we'll honor that. That's completely fine. Or we'll find another way to tell it in a way that's anonymous, that's respectful, but still powerful. There's lots of ways you can do it. But I think more often than not, credit unions kind of fall into the trap of saying, hey, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more effort. Let's just talk about, here's what we did. Let's make the press release and let's move on and call that a story. And I think that's one of our blind spots.
What's interesting is we're having this conversation about this story, and we're sort of framing it in through the lens of sharing that with the general public. But that is a fantastic story to share internally. We need to do a good job at telling our story to we call our employees of credit union colleagues, but we need to share that internally so that we get the word out internally, and they can share that in whatever sort of sanitized way that we decide it's available for public consumption, or sometimes not. But giving the employees all of those feels that, you just communicating the story gave me the feels. So, imagine being a member of that credit union and learning about, maybe we didn't do things right from day one, but we did it right at the end. And what kind of ownership and what kind of pride you might feel in your credit union, and take that into every interaction that you have with your members. So I love that, a lot of credit unions do a great job of sharing all of those reviews and stuff like that. But these sorts of stories, I think we really need to tell behind the walls, so to speak, so that we double down and we multiply. It becomes a force multiplier, and our colleagues really embody those sorts of behaviors, certainly the end state behavior, for all of the members, and not just, this one unfortunate member.
There's a very quick analogy to that. So I've been really privileged for the last almost 10 years now to be a speaker for America's Credit Unions Management School. I'm part of their faculty. And I have been able to give a talk on leadership to the third years. And during that time, we get into storytelling, we get into narrative, and I shared the Elizabeth story. And there have been people in those classes from Idaho Central that had no idea about that story. And to see them come up to me afterwards and say, I had no idea that we did that, but I'm really glad that we did.
That's a great story, but also just a terrible story that they don't know that.
It is. And again, this is not to ascribe any sort of, bad motivation, but we move so fast in this industry to get to the next KPI, to get to the next quarter, to get to the next thing. And we are not slowing down in the stories that we tell. And that's one of the big things that I did with the research that created the story score model that I'm using to help credit unions, is that we're not being specific about the work that we're doing. We don't give ourselves the time to go collect those stories. That's really, really concerning for me. Yeah. And I think that, that's where I'll end that thought.
So let's lighten it up a bit. So in March, and I think I shared this in our LinkedIn conversation, in March, I saw that the American Customer Satisfaction Index released a survey, and sort of the top line summary was that, credit unions' advantage they've had over other fintechs and banks is slipping, and that while the face-to-face interactions with customers or members is still relatively high as compared to banks, because of some of our maybe inability to keep up on the digital front, some of those overall scores are slipping. We're probably not going to win the battle in fintech. We're probably not going to win the battle in R&D and AI and all of the technology that I live in on a daily basis. But is this another opportunity where telling our story, such as Elizabeth's story, and maybe some lighter versions of that, can combat our inability to be, winners in one area, but certainly outperform our bank and fintech brethren and sisters in competing for customers or member satisfaction?
Absolutely, it is. And I point to the recently released award winners from just this year's America's Credit Union's Diamond Awards that gives out excellence in marketing and PR and business development. So many of those entries had in there that, hey, we want to be raw, we want to be real, we know that our members want to connect with real people. And I think that's a massive opportunity for credit unions. And again, this is not a sense of, we just don't care about people, we just care about our KPIs and our and our reports. But yes, I think that we're leaving a lot of reputation on the table. We're leaving a lot of advantage out there on the table by kind of skating past those stories and just saying, this is just routine. This is what we do every day. I would love to see us invest more in storytelling, but not just, and when we say storytelling, being really clear about what we're talking about. I'm not saying do more reporting about all the stuff that we did. I'm talking about you have to put a real face on the stuff that you had and the impact that you made, and talk about transformation, talk about friction, talk about the messy middle when things may not have worked. Those are the real stories that get not just clicks, but they change lives.
Yep, absolutely. So here's the dilemma. In a recent CU Collaborate survey, which I think was released fairly recently, their survey indicated that 75% of people had a positive view of credit unions in general. But positive perception doesn't necessarily equate to membership or, choosing a credit union as their primary financial institution. 20% of those surveyed, even though they had a 75% positive perception of credit unions, do any primary banking with a credit union. So how do we bridge that gap? What kind of story can we tell that simultaneously lifts or at least keeps that 75% where it's at, but still increases the adoption of those services?
So I think part of it, just from a documentary storyteller's heart, that's kind of my entry point into the story. Like looking at that, and I would want to talk to like the decision makers in a specific credit union. Let's say when they look at that stat and go, "Crap, how do we fix that? I would love that entire process story. Put that on your website, put that on your socials and say, hey, we saw this thing come down. And it's a stat that shocked us. It's a stat that gave us even more white hair than I've got right now. And we decided that we're going to find a way to fix it. And we're going to take you, the community, into that journey. Mm-hmm. That's a differentiator. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting story right there, because that's a human story that has risk and surprise. You don't know where it's going to go. And it's not this, this very cliched stereotype story of, hey, this person came in, they had really bad credit, but they came and sat with us and now they've got a loan and now they've got a home. And those are great. Those are good stories, but everybody's got them. You take somebody into, there's a bit of actionable intelligence here that could present an existential crisis to not just the industry, to my specific credit union. How did we as a team respond to that? Not just putting a recap in the annual report, not just maybe making a passing mention of it at the annual meeting, but take people into the real human drama of what we actually did. That's a differentiator. Now, I'm not saying that's the magic bullet. I'm not saying that's going to make our market share be like, oh, it's going to hockey stick. But when we talk about, if we're serious about telling great stories, if we're serious about, we want to get really good at this, then we have to start telling the stories that no one else tells, but we know everybody's telling. Mm-hmm. We know that those kind of interactions that I just talked about there, we know those conversations, those are the water cooler discussions. That's mm-hmm. your organizational gossip. That's what people are like. It's kind of top of mind. Let's bring it out in the open. You show me the first credit union willing to kind of take, open the kimono on that mm-hmm. and take the community on that ride. Mm-hmm. And have them kind of see real time how we're trying to modify and understand this and evolve. The first credit union that does that, they win, because mm-hmm. no one else can touch that story.
So what is the anatomy of a good story? What does a good story look like for a credit union?
So, I like to make the distinction, between good and great stories. All good stories have transformation, that, once upon a time somebody did this and then by the end of it, they were different. But a great story has risk and surprise. Okay. And the architecture of a story it's fundamentally different for the audience. Within a few seconds, when someone reads something that credit union content, like some credit union that they put on the website or social media, the audience is going to bring a set of questions to it. If it's a story, if they recognize that, hey, this has an actual narrative, there's a setup, there's a middle, there's tension, there's uncertainty, there's risk and surprise, there's a resolution. Throughout that story, the person's asking a question. The one question is, what happens next? Pull me forward. Let me kind of go on this ride with you. If, however, this reads more like a press release, hey, here's the thing that we did, here's the big check that we gave, look at all these happy smiling faces, that's called operational reporting. And again, it's good information that shows the credit union knows what it's doing. But the problem with operational reporting is the questions that it raises in the person's mind. In the person's mind, when they read operational reporting, they're subconsciously asking themselves, do I have to know this? Is this memorable? Mm-hmm. Can I stop reading? Yep. When can I start scrolling next? Mm-hmm. And these are instantaneous decisions. Mm-hmm. People know when they're going to be getting a story or when they're just going to be reading a really nice press release with some really great stock photos. And so understanding the difference in between the two and knowing that going from operational reporting to an actual narrative is not a function of adding five figures more into your marketing budget. It is instead adding some different structural elements to the narrative and putting those in there and knowing how strong each one of those are. Mm-hmm. That's what can make stories transformational. Again, not every single thing has to be an incredible narrative. But if you start moving a little bit in that direction, start transforming some of those into great stories, I think that's the opportunity for us.
Is there a place for both?
Oh, there absolutely has to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it's like body fat. As I become older, I have more body fat.
Where are you going with this?
So, there's nobody in the world that's ever going to have 0% body fat. Mm-hmm. Okay. We as an organization, we need to be able to tell our communities that we know what we're doing. We're active in the community. Here are the things that we do. And that's great. That again, that establishes trust. That's
your operational reporting.
That's the operational reporting. Mm-hmm. But then if you can take them and say, okay, because of the trust that you've put in us, because of how strong we are, because of our relationship with the community, we're now going to start telling these narratives. Here's how we have understood that. Here's where that trust has come from. Here are the lessons that we've learned. That's narrative. That's story. That's what happens next. And so I think, though, from a risk standpoint, lots of credit unions kind of say, well, no, we don't want to get into that because for a variety of reasons. And a lot of them is just, we don't think we have the time. They just kind of default to the operational reporting. Let's just put the press releases out. Let's just use the stock photos. Let's put the stuff out there that pretty much everybody else has, because we don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons.
Right.
And again, it's not malicious. It's not done out of nefarious intent. It's just, unfortunately, it's just habit. And I know how easy it is to get into that pattern. I also know how easy it is to start breaking it. And the institutions that start breaking it, they're the ones that will win.
So do you think the operational reporting is content to be mined to find these more impactful and more broad stories, or are they completely separate things?
No, I think that is as fertile ground as you can find. And the research that I've done on this, basically 89% of the content that's labeled credit union stories they're not stories. They're operational reporting. But if you do start looking at that and saying, hey, what are some things we can turn over here? Where are some things that, okay, there's a little bit more to this. What was the rest of the story on this? That's where you can start finding it. You don't have to conjure them out of thin air. They're already there. It's just asking a few more questions, being a little bit more curious, and kind of pulling on some threads here. I think that can really reveal a gold mine if you're willing to look for it.
Interesting.
And a bit more of a recent story. And again, we're going to kind of go back into the cancer world here a little bit. So for a couple of years, I got to serve as a storyteller for an organization called the Tri-Unity Foundation. It was created by St. Cloud Financial Credit Union
in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, yeah. Yep. They give cash grants up to $10,000 for credit union members that have been given a terminal diagnosis, cancer or another life-threatening illness. And I helped help kind of tell their stories. And you're right, it could have been very easy for this fledgling foundation to basically say, hey, we gave out, X number of dollars to these people and they were very appreciative. And we get, they get a photo with the big check. I think where the impact was having a commitment early on that the foundation said that, no, we're going to tell these stories in a way that is compelling, in a way that has not really been done before, that has a level of intimacy and honor that you typically don't find in these. So I got to go to many of these recipients' houses in Minnesota, all over the country, just in Minnesota, Wisconsin, all over the country, sit in their living rooms, breathe their same air, and talk with them about where were they before? What was life like before they got the bad news? What was their life before the grant? What was the life afterwards? To collect photos, to get the audio, to sit with them, to sit in that situation and really try to tell a narrative that honors what they went through. And I'm not saying that, okay, well, because of that, look at all this money that everybody got. I don't want to say that. But I've gotten notes from those families. Some of them who the recipient of the grant has since passed, has said that story honored my loved one. And that will stay with us for the rest of my life. Absolutely. And so being given the opportunity by Tri-Unity to create a library of those kind of narratives that are rich and intimate and deep and hopeful. They're not just like, this tragedy tourism. This is hope, but acknowledging the real difficult part of this. That is some of my favorite work that I'll ever do. Certainly because it resonates with me, but I think it speaks to the larger opportunity that we as credit unions have if we are willing to leave our offices, breathe the same air as the folks that we are working with, and show how we can show the real struggle and not just compress the messy middle and sanitize it, and show the real human journey. I think there's real opportunity there.
I wonder if maybe there's an opportunity for credit unions to exercise these muscles by having these conversations and being prescriptive about collecting them, essentially doing what you're doing, sitting with, these soldiers and sailors and talking through, hey, how did this impact you? And maybe your sort of crawl, walk, run approach is, let's gather the stories.
Yes.
That's your crawl. Your walk is, let's share them internally with a bunch of the employees, in our cases, colleagues, so that we share our story and we share our mission and we share all of the, all of the positive things that you get from those stories. Somewhere along the way, we identify one or two impactful stories that certainly the recipients are open to, but ones that I think align with how we want to be perceived, and share those externally. And maybe that's the direction for credit unions, sort of on ramp into this process.
That's precisely it. And again, we're not going to become amazing at this overnight.
Right.
And that's why I created StoryScore, is to give credit unions an actual framework that they can understand. Here's what you're building your stories on. The StoryScore, it's basically like a home inspection for your narratives. It doesn't look at writing style. It doesn't look at, grammar and all of that. It looks at the actual structure of the narrative itself. Does this narrative that you're putting together, does it have all of the elements that someone would need, that the audience would need to recognize this as a story, to remember it as a story, to share it as a story, and to stick in the person's mind as a story? That's what this service does. And so being able to kind of say, okay, we're going to start putting what we do through this framework, and it'll tell you, this is operational reporting. This has the bones of a narrative. This has a real potential to be something really, really meaningful. Mm-hmm. It shows you exactly where those strong and weak spots are. So you're not just having to guess, or you're not having to go into Chat GPT and ask it to do it for you.
Exactly.
This helps you understand what narrative, how it's supposed to be put together, but it gives you the freedom to put together in a way that honors the institution and the members that you're talking about. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about. And I'm getting some really good responses, some preliminary responses already from credit unions and some other organizations about it.
So I want to talk a little bit about what you do, but I before I get into that, I want to ask you, we talked about, there's a little bit of a fine line there. There's a gray area, before you become performative and before it's perceived that you're taking advantage of these situations. What are some things that credit unions should be aware of when they're looking to build these stories and when they're looking to start sharing these things? What are some red flags? What are some stop signs that credit unions should be on the look for so that they don't cross over that line?
We do have a fiduciary responsibility to our members, and making sure that we are not violating any sort of privacy laws, violating any sort of operational regulations or any procedures there. We have to be good stewards of our members' money. That includes spending our members' money to tell another member's story. In the same vein, though, we need to also make sure that that we are extremely upfront with that member about, this is exactly how this is going to be used. This is where it's going to be used. This is for what purposes it's going to be used. And, we want to be really upfront with that. Those are the two areas that I think that where storytelling, I think, from an organizational level, can break down. That the member is surprised, oh, I didn't know you were doing that. Or the institution is surprised about going, oh, we didn't know you were going to talk about that. So I think if everybody understands that, hey, we know what we're talking about, we know why we're doing it, and we know here, and what do we need to keep behind the curtain, and what's the reason for it, I think that helps remove pretty much all of the barriers that you're going to have out there. So I think by going through that process, that's been the process that's worked for me, being really cognizant, because I've been on the institution side. I know the questions they're going to ask, but on the member side of it, what's going to be their reaction when they see it online, and be really clear about what those expectations are. I think that makes it a lot easier for everybody involved.
So you've touched on it a little bit, but tell me a little bit about StoryScore.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this. This was something that I wish I would have had many, many years ago because it would have helped me not create so many bad stories, stories that this kind of an opportunity for me to kind of flex my writing muscle, but they weren't really a story. They were really an ego piece. So what StoryScore does, it is a way for credit unions to evaluate their entire storytelling ecosystem, either from an individual story standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, and see, where they're strong, where they're weak, and where they're missing completely. The home inspection analogy here, again, I want to hit on that. This will show you the structural elements that are necessary for a story to land. And will show you for each one of those dimensions, those 10 dimensions, how strong are you in them? Scores each one of those dimensions 0 to 2, and it will give you a score at the very end of it called a story score that shows you, hey, this is how well you're doing with this. And if your listeners want to go to the makegreatstories.com website, it shows you a lot of the structure that's there. What it's basically talking about here is it's designed to make storytelling approachable. It's designed for you to understand, okay, here's some things that we need to maybe do a little bit more of. Here's some areas that we're already strong in. So what it's designed to take a lot of the mystery out of storytelling. So often we think, okay, well, it's only for, the literary few, or we have to find the reclusive writer up there somewhere in the mountains. No, anybody can do this. If I can do this, anybody can do this. But it will also point you to say, okay, what you're putting out here works better as operational reporting. You've got the bones of a story here. If they go to the website, if your listeners go to the website, there is a sample story that I took from a credit union, a fairly prominently displayed story on their website that I put through the StoryScore model and have them kind of work through, what does this story actually score? And it's an anonymized story, so I changed all the identifying characteristics, but the narrative flow is the same. And it says, well, this story is basically a 3 out of 20. 20 is the highest score, 0 is not. And it scored about a 3. And that's when I've evaluated over 1,500 stories from 100 randomly selected credit unions. The average of all of those stories was about a 4.2.
Wow.
So it's designed to, it's not punitive. And I want to be really, really clear about this. This is not me saying, okay, I'm going to sit here and school all of you credit union people, all you little noobs on this. I'm going to sit and tell all of you, here's how ugly your baby is. I'm not going to do that at all. This is instead me saying, okay, you have a heart for this. We all know that we want to get better at this. Let me show you where this is actually working. Again, going back to the home inspection, when you buy a home, you care about what's the painting and all of that, but you want to make sure, is the floor going to explode here in the next month? This shows you exactly what's strong, weak, and non-existent. It's also showing you a phenomenon called the superhero problem, which is a tendency in credit union reporting, especially to position the credit union as kind of the hero and the member as basically kind of a side character. The superhero problem basically demotes the member to a prop in the credit union story rather than the protagonist of their own. Absolutely. And it shows you exactly where you're doing this, how you are centering the institution rather than the member, and it shows you exactly how to fix it. And if you do this story score evaluation for the entire credit union, it will also give you ideas about, hey, here's some different narrative threads that you can start pulling on. Here's some story ideas based on your specific market that you can start developing that requires almost zero upfront financial investment, that requires literally just asking a few additional questions and changing some things around narratively. Now you've got a story that scores much higher on the story score scale.
Who within an organization is equipped to do this work? Is this a marketing function? Is this a CRO function? Is this just somebody who's great at creative writing? Like, who would be a great candidate to get started with this sort of thing inside of a credit union?
I think for most of my conversations, it seems to start with the marketing department, even if it's a small one-person shop inside of an organization, or if it's a dozen deep team at a triple comma asset size credit union. I think that's the best place to start, because I think, at least from my experience, they're kind of the ones that are the tip of the storytelling spear. that those are the folks that have been either by their own design or just by organizational fiat have said, you're going to be the ones that will be the keeper of all of our narratives.
Yep.
So start there, but it doesn't just end there, because another C-level, C-suite employee, another, somebody in another vertical of the organization, they may have a really good narrative that they may not know what to do with. So it goes back to what you're talking about earlier with credit unions saying, how do we have an internal dialogue about capturing those member transformations? How do we curate those internally, have our own little bank of stories that we can start pulling from and culling and seeing which ones we can develop into larger narratives. So it starts with marketing, but it really needs to be a collective thing, a communal thing internally.
That's great. Andy, this was awesome. This was a lot of great information. I got some feels. I wasn't expecting some feels. I mean, we're talking stories, but I suppose I should have expected that a little bit. This was really good stuff.
I appreciate it.
So one of the I like to steal from everybody. I will shamelessly do that. And one of my favorite podcasts and one of my favorite podcasters is Stephen Bartlett and his Diary of a CEO. And one of the things he does on his podcast is he asks his guests to answer a question from a previous guest and leave one of their own for the next guest, not knowing who they are. So we're gonna start with the question from my last guest, who actually gave me this question yesterday. Her name is Amber Harson. She's been in the credit union movement for almost as long as we have. And her question was, what was a surprising element of being in a leadership role that you did not expect?
I think even now, I mean, even though I don't work at a credit union, I still try and, be a leader in different capacities. What surprised me, I think, is sometimes my own surety, thinking that, got it figured out, got it locked down, I'm going here, I'm moving fast, got to be the expert, got to be 10 foot high and bulletproof. And that has tripped me up more times than I can count. I'm a big fan of the show Ted Lasso, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's going to be listening to this.
Absolutely.
One of the mantras of that is be curious, not judgmental.
Absolutely.
And it's always interrogating. Okay, let me be curious about what I'm doing. What am I basing my assumptions on? Are those correct? Or am I doing this to be comfortable, or am I doing this to be effective?
Absolutely.
And I haven't always liked the answers that I've gotten from that.
Yep.
But it's always been, I think, a really revelatory process. I guess the question I would leave for your future guest would be, you've been given 10 minutes on the main stage at GAC to talk about anything that you want to, but you cannot use the terms. You cannot use some of our industry buzzwords like, people helping people.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, you have to kind of speak truth to a room full of 6,000 people. What would you say? You have no slides and you've just been given 5 minutes beforehand to go on stage. What would you say?
That's a great question. And I loved your answer to the first question. I'm a Ted Lasso fan as well. This, if you look back through the episodes of this podcast, I'm a chief information officer. I've been in technology for my entire life. Certainly at credit union for my entire life. But the one thing that's probably consistent in all of my episodes is very few of my episodes have a lot of tech in them. I've had conversations with folks from, the HR space about DEI and about, my very first podcast guest, his belief is that every organization should have a chief consciousness officer. Certainly not an area that I play in on a regular basis. But it's about being curious and it's about perspective. And for me, it's always asking questions. I want to be I certainly want to be a well-rounded executive, but I want to be a well-rounded human. So I think asking these questions and, broadening your scope of knowledge and just broadening the questions that you ask, I think makes you a better human and makes you better prepared to interact and just engage with other people. So for me, this is Your answer couldn't have been better. I mean, spot on, check, fully support, full send, however you want to. I absolutely support that and endorse every word of it. So thank you for that. Absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
So this was great. I am going to, put all of the relevant links to your website and, and some of the information that we talked about. I mentioned a survey or two. I'll put links to that in the show notes as well. But thank you very much, Andy, for your time, your experience, your knowledge, and sharing that with my, dozens and dozens of eager listeners that are sucking up knowledge. So very much appreciate it.
And I truly do appreciate your curiosity. I appreciate your willingness to, let's ask uncomfortable questions that maybe not be necessarily in my vertical, but I know they're going to be good for me and the people that I serve. That's part of the cooperative process. So I'm just was really honored to be part of this conversation. So thank you very much for that.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization, employer, or entity. The content provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Always seek the guidance of a qualified expert for any specific concerns. Thank you for listening to the Knowledge Stack Podcast.